My beloved child, do not scroll away from this moment. Something has been moving quietly beneath the surface, and what you are about to hear was meant to find you at a moment when your heart could finally receive it. You may have wondered why everything surrounding this connection has felt strangely suspended, as though one chapter refused to close while the next refused to begin. You may have questioned the silence, the distance, the unanswered emotions, and the moments when hope seemed close enough to touch before disappearing again. But in this fictional message of divine encouragement, imagine heaven drawing near and whispering that the waiting was never empty. Something has been forming inside the person connected to your heart, and the next step they once feared is becoming harder for them to resist. Stay here, because the most important part is not simply that something may change. It is what has been changing inside them that could finally make movement possible. There was a time when your soulmate believed they could continue carrying everything silently. They thought they could distract themselves, bury certain emotions beneath responsibilities, and convince themselves that what they felt would eventually become easier to ignore. Yet some feelings do not disappear merely because they are inconvenient. Some truths become louder in silence. And in this story, the truth inside their heart has reached a place where pretending no longer brings peace. Something they once avoided has returned to their thoughts with unusual clarity. Your memory has been appearing in unexpected moments. A conversation reminds them of you. A song awakens something they thought they had buried. A quiet evening suddenly becomes filled with questions they never answered. And each time they attempt to push those questions aside, another one rises. What if the connection I was afraid to face was the connection I was supposed to understand? They have been wrestling with that question more deeply than you realize. From the outside, their life may appear ordinary. People around them may see their familiar routines, their conversations, their responsibilities, perhaps even their smiles. But the private landscape of a person's heart can look completely different from the life everyone else sees. Behind those ordinary moments, they have been reconsidering choices they once felt certain about. They have replayed words. They have remembered moments when they should have spoken differently. They have wondered whether hesitation protected them or merely delayed something meaningful. And somewhere inside that reflection, a realization has begun forming that frightens them and comforts them at the same time. They cannot move forward honestly without confronting what they feel about you. But there is something even deeper happening. Their next step is not being born from desperation. It is being born from clarity. That difference matters. They once imagined that reaching toward you would require them to have every answer, every fear resolved, every circumstance perfectly arranged. They waited for confidence to arrive before taking action. Yet confidence rarely arrives before courage. Often courage must move first, and confidence follows afterward. Your soulmate is beginning to understand this. They are realizing that if they continue waiting until nothing feels uncertain, they may wait forever. And that realization has shifted something powerful inside them. The question is no longer, am I completely ready? The question becoming louder is, what happens if I never try? That question changed the atmosphere of their thoughts. Suddenly, the possibility of remaining silent began feeling heavier than the possibility of speaking. Imagine them alone with that realization, staring into the distance while everything around them continues normally. No dramatic announcement. No thunder. No visible sign that something extraordinary is happening. Yet inside, an old wall begins cracking. They remember the times they nearly reached out. They remember words typed and erased, conversations imagined but never started, moments when pride told them to wait and fear told them to disappear. And now they are beginning to see those moments differently. What once looked like protection now looks like postponement. My child, perhaps you have experienced your own version of this waiting. Perhaps there were nights when you wondered whether you imagined the depth of this connection. Perhaps you questioned yourself because the outward circumstances did not match what your heart seemed to recognize. Yet this message is not asking you to chase anyone, force anything, or put your life on hold. It is reminding you of something more empowering. Another person's hesitation does not determine your worth. You were never meant to shrink yourself while waiting for somebody else to become brave. Your journey has continued for a reason. Every moment you spent rebuilding your peace, learning boundaries, strengthening your heart, and rediscovering who you are has mattered. And strangely, your growth may be part of what has made their own truth impossible to ignore. They expected you to remain exactly as they remembered you. But something about your energy has changed. You are not standing emotionally where you once stood. Even if you still care deeply, there is a new strength beneath that care. You have begun understanding that love should not require abandoning yourself. You have started seeing the difference between patience and endless waiting. And whether your soulmate consciously recognizes every detail or not, they sense that the old dynamic cannot continue forever. Something must become clearer. Something must be spoken. Something must move. This is where the story becomes more mysterious, because recently there was a moment that pushed them closer to a decision. It may have appeared insignificant to everyone else, but it landed differently inside them. Perhaps they heard something about relationships that reflected their own situation. Perhaps someone asked them a question they were not prepared to answer. Perhaps they saw another person take a courageous step and suddenly recognized their own avoidance. Or perhaps they simply reached the end of another ordinary day and realized that no amount of distraction had changed what remained in their heart. Whatever the moment looked like, it created an uncomfortable clarity. Time continues moving whether they act or not. And that realization followed them. They tried returning to normal thoughts, but something had already shifted. The question remained. What if waiting becomes the reason I lose the opportunity to say what matters? Notice what is happening here. Their fear has not completely vanished. Instead, another emotion is becoming stronger than the fear. They are beginning to fear regret more than vulnerability. That is the turning point. For a long time, vulnerability felt like the greatest risk. Now silence is beginning to feel riskier. They have imagined what they might say to you. Not once. More than once. They have rehearsed different beginnings because the first words feel strangely important. Should they begin casually? Should they admit immediately that they have been thinking about you? Should they acknowledge the distance? Should they explain what was happening inside them when everything became complicated? They have gone back and forth because there is one thing they desperately do not want to do: approach you carelessly. Somewhere inside, they know that if they step forward again, words alone will not be enough. That is another revelation you need to hear. Their next step cannot simply be another beautiful promise. Something inside them understands that. Perhaps this connection has already carried enough ambiguity. Perhaps there have been moments when feelings were present but consistency was missing. Perhaps intentions existed without action. Whatever the history may symbolize in this fictional story, your soulmate is realizing that genuine movement must look different from temporary emotion. If they come toward you, they must bring honesty with them. If they speak, they must be willing to answer difficult questions. If they say they care, their behavior must eventually reflect those words. This realization has made them slower, but it has also made their intention more serious. They are not merely asking themselves whether they miss you. Missing someone is easy. They are asking whether they are prepared to show up differently. And that question reaches places inside them that romance alone cannot reach. It touches maturity, accountability, courage. It asks them to confront patterns they once excused. It asks them to admit where fear influenced their choices. It asks them to stop blaming circumstances for everything they avoided. And something surprising happened when they began confronting those questions. Instead of feeling only shame about the past, they began feeling possibility about the future. That possibility is what has been pulling them toward their next step. Imagine heaven watching two people grow through different chapters, not controlling their choices but illuminating the places where courage is needed. Imagine an archangel standing at the edge of this story, not promising an outcome, but whispering, "Choose truth over fear." That is the spiritual heartbeat of this moment. Love is not proven by destiny language. It is revealed through free choices made with integrity. And your soulmate is approaching a choice they can no longer avoid. Yet before I reveal what that choice may become, you need to understand what has been happening to you, because your transformation is part of this story too. There was a version of you who might have accepted almost any sign as enough. A message could have made your entire world stop. A small gesture could have convinced you to overlook everything unresolved. But experience has taught you something. You no longer want fragments when your heart is capable of something whole. You do not want confusion disguised as mystery. You want clarity. You want mutual effort. You want to feel chosen through consistent action, not merely imagined through beautiful words. That change inside you matters more than you know. Because if your soulmate takes the next step, they may discover that they are not returning to the same person they once knew. You have evolved. You have survived days they never saw. You have carried questions privately. You have learned to create peace without receiving every explanation you wanted. And that means any future conversation must meet the person you are becoming, not the person you used to be. Your soulmate senses this. It is part of what has created urgency inside them. They understand, perhaps for the first time, that you are not frozen in time waiting for their courage. Your life is moving. Your heart is learning. Your standards are becoming clearer. And somewhere inside them rises a thought that they cannot easily silence. If I truly care, I cannot keep expecting this person to wait while I decide whether I am brave enough. That thought has been powerful. There was recently a quiet moment when they almost surrendered to their old pattern again. They told themselves perhaps it would be easier to leave everything untouched. No difficult conversation. No vulnerability. No possibility of rejection. Just silence. For a few minutes, that option probably felt safe. But then another image entered their mind, you continuing forward without them. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Simply peacefully. And that image affected them more than they expected. Because they suddenly understood that losing access to someone does not always happen through a dramatic goodbye. Sometimes it happens quietly when that person finally chooses peace. Sometimes the door does not slam. It simply stops being held open. Your soulmate realized that if they continue doing nothing, they are still making a choice. Silence is a choice. Delay is a choice. Avoidance is a choice. And every choice eventually creates a consequence. This is why the next step feels different. They are no longer only thinking about what they feel. They are thinking about what they are willing to do about it. But there is another layer, and this is where the story begins accelerating. Someone around them may have noticed the change. Perhaps your soulmate has become more reflective. Perhaps they have asked unusual questions. Perhaps they mentioned your name after avoiding it for a long time. Perhaps a trusted person recognized the expression on their face before they could hide it. And during a conversation, something was said that pierced straight through their defenses. It was not necessarily dramatic. Sometimes one honest sentence is enough. What are you actually afraid of? Imagine the silence after that question. Your soulmate could probably list many explanations. Timing. Circumstances. Past experiences. Uncertainty. Pride. Fear of repeating mistakes. Fear that you might not respond the way they hope. But beneath every explanation, there was one truth: they were afraid of becoming emotionally visible. To love from a distance can feel safer because imagination cannot reject you. But real connection requires stepping into uncertainty. It requires allowing another person to see what matters. Your soulmate has been standing near that threshold for longer than they want to admit. Now something is pulling them across it. My beloved, do not misunderstand this as a command to wait by your phone or interpret every coincidence as proof. Your power does not come from obsessively searching for signs. Your power comes from remaining grounded while life reveals itself through real actions. Let this story inspire hope without surrendering discernment. If someone belongs in your future, they must eventually participate in building it. You should not have to carry both sides of a bridge. And strangely, this is exactly what your soulmate is beginning to understand. They know the next move belongs to them. That realization may be why you have felt emotionally detached from forcing an outcome lately. There comes a point when the heart stops begging for certainty and begins choosing peace. That peace can feel unfamiliar at first because it is quieter than longing. But it is powerful. You are learning to say inwardly, what is meant to meet me must also move toward me. And while you have been learning that lesson, your soulmate has been facing the opposite side of it. If I want this connection, I must move. 2 lessons. 2 people. 1 turning point. There is something beautiful about the timing of that contrast. While you are learning not to chase, they are learning not to hide. While you are learning to release control, they are learning to accept responsibility. While you are becoming comfortable with uncertainty, they are becoming uncomfortable with silence. That is why this moment feels different. But there is still one obstacle inside them. It is not another person. It is not distance. It is not circumstance. It is the fear that they may have waited too long. That fear has become especially intense. They wonder whether your feelings have changed. They wonder whether you would even believe them now. They wonder whether the version of you who once would have welcomed them immediately still exists. And perhaps the most difficult question of all, if they finally tell you everything, will you ask why it took them so long? They know you would have every right to ask. So they have been thinking about their answer. And the answer they are beginning to form contains something you may not expect. They did not stay silent because you meant too little. In this story, they stayed silent partly because what they felt exposed parts of themselves they had never learned how to handle. You touched something deeper than attraction. You made them imagine possibilities that required them to become more emotionally honest than they were accustomed to being. And when a person is unfamiliar with vulnerability, even something beautiful can trigger retreat. They may confuse emotional intensity with danger. They may step backward precisely because something matters. But understanding that pattern does not excuse it. Your soulmate is finally learning that distinction. Their fears can explain their choices without giving those choices unlimited permission to continue. That is growth. And growth demands movement. Something within them has begun saying, enough hiding. They may still hesitate when the moment comes. Their fingers may hover over a message. Their heart may race before a conversation. They may rewrite the first sentence repeatedly. They may wonder whether today is the right day, whether tomorrow would be safer, whether one more week would give them more certainty. But then they remember what waiting has already cost. And something inside them answers, no more postponing what needs honesty. This is where the fictional voice of heaven becomes almost a whisper. Courage is approaching the door that fear kept locked. Yet the next step is not exactly what you think. You might assume it is simply a message saying, I miss you. It goes deeper. They have already realized that those words would not address everything. They need to tell you something they once avoided admitting even to themselves. Something about the way they saw you. Something about the moment their feelings became real. Something about why they pulled back when part of them wanted to move closer. And there is a specific memory attached to it. They remember a moment between you more clearly than you probably realize. Perhaps you considered it ordinary. Perhaps you forgot some details. But for them, something changed there. They saw something in you that made the connection suddenly feel serious. Maybe it was your kindness when nobody was watching. Maybe it was the way you listened. Maybe it was the strength beneath your softness. Maybe it was the way you walked away from something that compromised your dignity. Whatever that moment was, it stayed. And they never told you. Instead, they carried it into the silence. Now they are considering bringing it back into the light. But before they do, they are confronting another truth: they cannot control your response. That may be their greatest lesson. For so long they wanted emotional certainty before becoming vulnerable. They wanted some guarantee that if they stepped toward you, you would step toward them. But relationships cannot be built through guarantees. They are built through honest invitations and freely chosen responses. Your soulmate is learning to release the outcome. They are beginning to understand that telling the truth may be worthwhile even if the conversation does not unfold exactly as imagined. Because there is dignity in honesty. There is freedom in finally saying what fear kept hidden. And there is maturity in allowing another person to choose without pressure. That shift could transform everything. Because now their next step is becoming less about possessing you and more about meeting you honestly. And that is the kind of movement worth noticing. My child, your role is not to predict exactly when or how this unfolds. Your role is to remain anchored in your own worth. If they come with sincerity, listen with discernment. If they come with consistency, observe it over time. If they bring only another wave of confusion, you are allowed to protect your peace. Heavenly love would never require you to abandon wisdom. The most beautiful connection is not one where two people are terrified of losing each other. It is one where two people freely choose honesty, respect, growth, and mutual presence. And this is why your soulmate's internal tran.